If you know this channel, you know one thing. The mob isn't all bullets and blood. Sometimes the most powerful man in the room didn't have to yell, didn't have to shoot, didn't even have to stand up. He just had to speak, calmly. And if you're the kind of person who wants to see how that kind of quiet power worked, stick around. By the end of this video, you'll know why the most polite men in the Mafia were often the deadliest. And while you're here, hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and watch this one to the end. Because today we're breaking down two names that redefined what it meant to be dangerous without being cruel. Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello. Two men who ruled not with fear, but with restraint. So grab a drink, sit back, and let's talk about the gentleman of the underworld and decide once and for all who really was the nicest mobster. Meyer Lansky never looked the part. 5'4", thin frame, quiet voice. He didn't fit the Hollywood mold of a gangster. But under that calm surface was a mind that built empires. Born in 1902 in what's now Belarus, he came to New York as a poor Jewish immigrant. He grew up on the Lower East Side, surrounded by noise, struggle, and the kind of street lessons you can't learn in school. Where other kids learned to fight, Meyer learned to think. He saw violence for what it really was: messy, unpredictable, expensive. But numbers? Numbers never lied. As a boy, he could memorize odds like poetry. He knew how dice behaved, how cards could be counted, and how every bet had a price. That gift would become his weapon. While most mobsters were fighting over corners, Meyer was building the financial backbone that made them all rich. He wasn't a killer, he was a calculator. He met Benjamin Bugsy Siegel as a teenager, and they were opposites that somehow fit. Bugsy was fire, reckless, loud, violent. Meyer was ice, precise, patient, unflappable. Together, they formed the Bugs and Meyer Mob, a small crew that handled protection, enforcement, and anything that paid. But even then, Lansky treated crime like a corporation. He paid his men on time. He tracked every dollar. And he made sure no one died without reason. To him, murder was an expense, one you avoided whenever possible. During Prohibition, Lansky worked under Arnold Rothstein, the man who fixed the 1919 World Series. Rothstein became his mentor, teaching him how money could move governments faster than bullets. By his 20s, Meyer was running numbers games, laundering bootleg profits, and turning chaos into structure. He wasn't just part of organized crime, he was organizing it. When Lucky Luciano came along with the vision of a national syndicate, Lansky was the quiet architect who made it real. He believed the Mafia needed rules, balance, and communication. No more random wars, no more endless vendettas, just cooperation and profit. He helped design the Commission, a council of bosses from every major family. And when disputes came up, Meyer was the one everyone trusted to mediate. He didn't shout, he didn't threaten, he listened, did the math, and made everyone money. By the 1940s, Lansky's reach stretched far beyond New York. He opened casinos in Florida, built gambling routes in New Orleans, and found paradise in Havana, Cuba. Under the dictatorship of Fulgencio Batista, Lansky turned Havana into the mob's golden playground. The casinos sparkled like palaces, politicians were on his payroll, dealers wore tuxedos, and the profits flowed like champagne. Tourists saw luxury. Meyer saw control. He kept his operations clean, disciplined, and efficient. There were no street brawls, no flashy executions, just balance sheets that always came out ahead. He treated partners like businessmen and gamblers like guests. That's what made him different. He understood that respect, even fake respect, made people spend more. He made crime look classy, but nothing lasts forever. When Fidel Castro came to power in 1959, the mob's Cuban empire collapsed overnight. Lansky lost millions, and for most men, that would have meant revenge. But not Meyer. He didn't waste a breath on anger. He packed his things, lit a cigarette, and said, "Bad investment." Then he moved on. That was his genius. No ego, no emotion, no panic. Just math. In the 1970s, when indictments started flying, Lansky tried to retire to Israel under the law of return. He figured he'd earned a peaceful ending, but the Israeli government turned him away, claiming his criminal record was too big to ignore. He came back quietly to Miami, where he lived out his final years in near silence. He never served a major prison sentence. He never bragged about power. He just faded away, quietly wealthy and oddly respected. Lansky's niceness wasn't about compassion, it was about discipline. He didn't like chaos. He didn't enjoy violence. He believed peace was profitable, and that every unnecessary death was just bad math. He wasn't kind, he was calculated, and that made him one of the calmest, most effective mobsters to ever live. Meyer Lansky was proof that in a world of blood and bullets, the sharpest weapon was a steady hand. If Lansky was the mind, Frank Costello was the voice. He was born Francesco Castiglia in Calabria, Italy in 1891 and came to New York as a 4-year-old kid. He grew up in East Harlem, the kind of place where you either learned fast or didn't last. Frank learned fast. He left school after the 5th grade and worked as a rent collector while his father ran a struggling grocery store. By the late 1910s, he'd already been arrested for carrying a gun. He served a year, came out, and swore he'd never carry one again. From then on, his weapons were words, money, and influence. During Prohibition, Costello mastered the art of moving liquor and staying untouchable. While the streets exploded with turf wars, he found smarter ways to expand, through politicians, judges, and the police. He realized something early that most gangsters never understood. You don't need to fight the system when you can buy it. That philosophy turned him into one of the most powerful men in America. They called him the Prime Minister of the Underworld, and it fit perfectly. He handled negotiations, settled disputes, and managed connections that reached all the way to City Hall. He was the mob's diplomat, calm, clean, confident. While his rivals shouted and threatened, Costello simply smiled and ordered another drink. By the 1930s, he was a millionaire many times over. His gambling and slot machine empire stretched from New York to New Orleans, backed by politicians like Louisiana Governor Huey Long. He didn't just own casinos, he owned the people who made them legal. In 1932, he attended the Democratic National Convention in Chicago, helping secure Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidential nomination. A mobster in the same room as future presidents, that was Costello's level of power. He didn't just control criminals, he controlled connections. He was always calm, always measured. He dressed like a banker, spoke like a diplomat, and never raised his voice. He believed fear was temporary, but relationships were forever. That's why other bosses came to him for advice. He could fix a war with a phone call, smooth out an arrest with a favor, and convince a rival to back down without drawing a single gun. Where Meyer Lansky ran the numbers, Costello ran the people. But his peaceful empire didn't stay hidden forever. In 1951, the Senate's Kefauver hearings put organized crime on live television, and Frank Costello became America's first mob celebrity. He took the stand, refusing to show his face, only his hands. And those hands, sweating and trembling under the lights, became the image of the Mafia for millions of viewers. His raspy voice, scarred by surgery, sounded like a movie villain come to life. He thought he could talk his way through it, but the public didn't buy it. He was sentenced to 18 months for contempt, and his spotless image took a hit. Still, even on camera, he stayed polite, never angry, never out of control. He once said, "If you want to live long in this business, keep your mouth shut and your shoes polished." He meant it. By 1957, his old rival Vito Genovese wanted him gone for good. He sent Vincent the Chin Gigante to take him out. One night, outside Costello's apartment, a bullet grazed his head, close enough to kill him if it was an inch deeper. When the cops asked who shot him, Costello said, "I don't know who it was, and even if I did, I wouldn't tell you." Then he retired. No revenge, no war, no drama. He walked away alive, and that was his victory. In retirement, Costello lived like a gentleman. He spent his mornings gardening, his afternoons reading newspapers, and his evenings at dinner with his wife of 50 years, Loretta. He'd become something rare, a mob boss who actually enjoyed peace. Younger bosses like Carlo Gambino came to him for advice, and he still had the same rule: business first, ego second. In his 80s, Costello started working on a memoir with journalist Peter Maas. He hinted at his ties to politicians and even the Kennedy family. But before the book could be finished, he died of a heart attack in 1973. They say he might have seen The Godfather before he died and smiled, recognizing himself in the calm authority of Marlon Brando's Don Corleone. Not the violence, the class. After his death, his tomb was bombed by rival mobsters, a message that the era of manners was over. The next generation preferred chaos to conversation. Frank Costello was the last of a dying breed, a gangster who didn't need fear to get respect. He earned it with composure. Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello were different men who shared the same goal: to prove that the Mafia didn't have to be barbaric to be powerful. They were businessmen trapped in a violent business, and they both figured out that peace was the ultimate profit. Lansky's version of nice came from logic. He wanted structure. He saw murder as waste and chaos as bad management. He built systems that kept hundreds of violent men in line, and he lasted longer than nearly all of them. Costello's version of nice came from diplomacy. He saw violence as the failure of communication. He could turn enemies into allies with one conversation. He was the mob's middleman between crime and politics, the bridge between two worlds that pretended not to know each other. Other mobsters ruled through intimidation: Luciano, Anastasia, Genovese. They died in blood. Lansky and Costello ruled through balance and composure, and they died in bed. That alone tells you everything. They weren't saints. They bribed, they lied, they profited off vice. But in a universe where power usually ended in murder, these two men found a different route. They showed that even criminals can prefer order over carnage, and maybe that's why, decades later, people still talk about them not as killers, but as gentlemen. Meyer Lansky, the accountant who made peace profitable. Frank Costello, the diplomat who made the mob look civilized. Both men understood that respect lasts longer than fear, and that's as close to nice as the Mafia ever got. So, who was the nicest mobster? Was it Meyer Lansky, the quiet genius who ruled with logic and kept the peace through numbers? Or was it Frank Costello, the prime minister who charmed his way through chaos and turned crime into conversation? Both men built legacies without bloodbaths. Both men outlived almost everyone they worked with, and both proved that in the underworld, brains and manners were more powerful than bullets. If you enjoyed this breakdown, hit that like button. It helps the channel more than you think. Drop a comment below and tell me who you think was the real gentleman of the underworld, Lansky's logic or Costello's charm. Share your thoughts, share your stories, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next deep dive into the minds behind the Mafia. This is Mafia Dork, where we don't just talk about the crime, we talk about the men who made it look almost civilized. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.